Testing.
That's mic 1 or 2?
1.
And if you hit the button here, it mutes it. So that was
Brilliant.
mute.
And now, yep.
It's about time to start, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Oh, we'll change the light to make you think that we started. Yes, we started. Okay, so first I have a couple of announcements following the SSCC meeting last week. So there were two general comments about the reading activities. One is that you would like to have the answers to each of the reading activities. Unfortunately, that is somewhat impossible for technical reason that we have 11 activities, each of which has 30 questions that we repeat every semester. So that would mean that we need to produce something like 300 questions every semester. And, well, we just don't have the human power, resources, or money, or will. It would just be a bit ridiculous to go that way. So that's the reason we're not giving you the answers. However, you do get a report at the end of your activities which tells you which answers you missed. And then, well, I guess that gives you some information as to what the right answer would be, because whatever you selected was the wrong answer, so there's only 3 remaining choices, 2 of which will be silly. So you can make a reasonable guess. Otherwise, you can take a screenshot and come and talk to us in office hours about it. Never post about it on Piazza, because we don't want to reveal the answers to other students, but it would be okay to take a screenshot and come and talk to us with it. And then we'll be happy to give you these remaining answers. Second thing is we've been asked to have the deadlines for the reading activities on a regular basis. So I think that was a comment. First semester I had all activities due on like the last day of the semester or the day before the exam, and then that wasn't good. So that didn't work, so that's why I split them in 2. So 6 chapters were due mid-semester and the remaining ones are due later on. But by the sound of it, you would like to have it either weekly or bi-weekly. And okay, well, fair enough. I'll take it on board, but we can't change it this late in the semester because the dates are settled. But maybe it's a little consolation for you to know that from next year, we will do that on a more regular basis. So yeah, so thanks for these feedbacks, and that's our comebacks. Otherwise, there were no other comments, so I guess that's about it. Today I'm very pleased to introduce my friend. I'll read his old name. Matthew Richard. Was that?
This could take a while.
It could take a while, and I apologize for the pronunciation, but it's important. Matthew Richard Xavier Xander Xanthias Xerxes Xanatos X Dracos Hieronymus Oliphant Ransom Dentith, who was a PhD student in Oakland, finished last year?
2012.
2012, that's already 2 years ago. He wrote a dissertation on the topic of the philosophy of conspiracy theories, and he's also basically the national expert on conspiracy theories. You might have seen him on TV. He's there sometimes to dispel or...
Yes, mostly dispel, but sometimes to make people be aware that some conspiracy theories aren't as bad as they appear to be.
That's right. And Matthew is also at BFM on a regular basis. What day is it now?
At the moment we're on hiatus because I'm actually training to be a primary school teacher at the moment, so I'm in schools in the morning, but
right.
Normally on Thursdays. We do a podcast, which is available every Thursday night, the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy.
Okay, good. And so without further ado, I'll just leave you with Matthew for our... I should say, Matthew was an important agent in the creation of this course.
A conspirator, if you will.
A conspirator, yes. He has been conspiring for previous iteration of this course. We have co-taught the course together a couple of years ago. So he's well known, he knows what he's talking about, and he's a really good resource for us to introduce this topic. And I will be back on Thursday to talk about inference to best explanations and things like that. So anyway, Matthew, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, so those are my personal details there, and also my forthcoming book, which is coming out November the 8th. So in a month's time will be the fun celebration of having a book launch for the conversion of my PhD into a delightful text, which is fun for all the family. But... No Facebook! Oh, right. Okay, so let's start by talking about that recent election. Now, it's actually interesting talking about the recent election with a crowd of stage 1 students, or at least undergrad students at the University of Auckland, because statistically, you are the age group which is least likely to vote. So in many respects, you'll be going, there was a recent election? Oh. Or you might be going, oh yeah, I kind of forgot about voting for that. Although I am going to assume that given that you are students doing a critical thinking course, you're also the kind of people who are engaged in political debate and want to analyse the kind of things that are said in the media about what's going on about our politicians. And thus we're very likely to have voted. I'm not quite sure whether you've done any work on stats or causes yet. I believe that's more towards the end of the semester. But I'm assuming you did vote. And that part of what informed your vote was either support for this gentleman, Cameron Slater, also known as Whale Oil, or support for the other gentleman, Nicky Hager, who wrote the book Dirty Politics. Now, no matter what you think about each individual, that election campaign we just went through was ripe with conspiracy theories. There were conspiracy theories centred on Cam Slater, arguing that actually he was involved in a conspiracy with or without permission of the National Party to pervert the vote and make sure that National came back into power. Whilst other people on the other side were arguing that Nicky Hager is a vapid left-wing conspiracy theorist with a political agenda who was actually going out of his way to try and ensure that good old National weren't going to win by engaging in a large-scale smear campaign. And so basically both sides engaged in allegations of conspiracy about the other. And what voters had to do, by and large, was take a stand. Either go, well, I think Cam Slater's not that bad, or I think he's quite bad, but Nicky Hager's worse. Or going, well, what Nicky Hager's pointed out actually seems to show that there's rot at the core of our government, and thus vote accordingly. So this particular election campaign we had was filled with conspiracy theories. And what's interesting about that is that often when we use the term conspiracy theory, we use it as a kind of pejorative. We use it as a term that marks out a kind of belief or explanation of phenomena within the world that we are rightly suspicious of. And my work in the field of the philosophy of conspiracy theories has been analysing whether that gut reaction many of us have toward claims of conspiracy theories in the wild, is actually justified. Because it's true that when we think about conspiracy theories, we tend to think about stories like this. Do the Illuminati or the Freemasons secretly rule the world? Who was really behind 9/11? Was it really Al-Qaeda? Was it really orchestrated by Osama bin Laden? Was the Queen Mother really an alien shape-shifting reptile? This is a conspiracy theory put forward by ex-British footballer, ex-British journalist David Icke, who believes the entire world is controlled by alien shape-shifting reptiles. So if you know someone in power, they are alien shape-shifting reptiles. And the alien shape-shifting reptiles have a variety of different goals within the political agenda. Either they want to drink our blood, or they want to eat our babies, or they are psychic vampires. They want to drain the goodness from our hearts and imprison us in a prison planet. Now, some of you might be going, that's a pretty wacky thing to believe, but David Icke's view is popular. In fact, David Icke came out to New Zealand 6 years ago now and gave a 9-hour lecture, which had 800 people in attendance in Auckland alone. So this is maybe a fringe belief, but it's a fringe belief where you probably know someone who is sympathetic towards it. And of course claims like, is anthropogenic climate change really occurring? And the old chestnut, did we really land on the moon? Or were the moon landings faked? So these are the kind of things we often think about when we hear the term conspiracy theory. And of course, people don't like to be accused of being conspiracy theorists, the kind of people who believe in conspiracy theories. Because conspiracy theorists are wacky, daft people who have weird, irrational beliefs. And no, we don't want to be associated with them. So often when people put forward something which is going to sound a little bit like a conspiracy theory, they do the old, well, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but. And when someone says, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but, you can guarantee the next thing they're going to say is going to be a conspiracy theory. In the same respect, if someone says, I'm not a racist, but, you can pretty much guarantee the next thing they're going to say is going to be a racist sentiment. The same is true, I'm not a sexist. The next thing the person is likely to say is about to be sexist. I'm not transphobic. The next thing they're about to say will be transphobic. We tend to use this locution to go, no, don't call me one of these, even though what I'm about to engage in marks me out as being one of those. But it's universally agreed, even amongst sexists, misogynists, and transphobics, that being a conspiracy theorist is a bad thing. And so you get people like Noam Chomsky, this gentleman up here with the rather immaculate glasses, who goes, look, there's a reason why we are suspicious of conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theorists, by and large, are irrational in some way, shape, or form, and actually a better understanding of claims of conspiracy is to be understood by the way institutions work in our society. People don't really conspire, it's just that we live in a world where power is centralized in really weird and wacky ways. And because of that, things that look like conspiracies get treated as conspiracy theories, but there are more prosaic explanations on offer. But of course, some people are actually willing to bite the bullet and say they are conspiracy theorists. This is the late Christopher Hitchens, and he was a conspiracy theorist about a thing called the October Surprise Thesis. The October Surprise Thesis was an explanation of how Ronald Reagan became President of the United States of America, which was in part, according to Hitchens, due to a conspiracy he undertook with Iran to delay the release of hostages under Jimmy Carter's regime, making Carter's regime look inept, and thus allowing Reagan to sweep into power. Now, not many historians or political scientists support the October Surprise Thesis, so it was labelled as being a vapid conspiracy theory, but Christopher Hitchens said, according to the evidence he had seen, it seemed like the most likely explanation of the event. So, on occasion, people are willing to bite the bullet on a conspiracy theory when it turns out to be a theory which they find to be warranted by the evidence, i.e. they look at the argument in support of the claim of conspiracy and go, turns out actually it's strongly suggested or entailed that there was a conspiracy. And then they go one step further and go, well, this conspiracy obviously explains some event in the world. So it actually turns out this conspiracy theory is true. Oh, I'm a conspiracy theorist. Maybe it's not a bad place to be after all. Now, New Zealand has its set of conspiracy theorists. We have Ian Wisher, the author and editor of Investigate magazines, along with a variety of different books on intelligent design, vitamin C, how Helen Clark was a lesbian, and other such interesting topics he's written about in length. We have John Ansell. He's a PR person who's worked with Labour, National and ACT. He has a particular conspiracy theory that actually there's a large-scale conspiracy by Maori to pervert our society by engaging in a fraudulent treaty claims process. It gets very complex and quite racist very quickly. Jonathan Eisen, who's the editor of Uncensored magazine, which is one of the other conspiratorial magazines available in New Zealand. Uncensored magazine is essentially a conspiracy theory magazine for people who don't have the internet yet, and that most of Uncensored are in fact web pages from the net printed out in glossy paper with the hyperlinks still in blue. So you can basically read it and start tapping at the page and then be reminded actually you're not looking at a web page whatsoever. And then we've got Brian Leland of the New Zealand Climate Science Coalition, which sounds delightfully innocuous, but is a climate change denying think tank who are trying to argue that NIWA and the government are engaging in fraudulent discussion about the effect of climate change in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And Vinnie Eastwood, who is our most successful conspiracy theory export overseas. Vinnie Eastwood has a 5 days a week, I think 2 hours a day internet radio show, which is broadcast on several networks in the US. He's basically the Alex Jones or Glenn Beck of New Zealand. He's a very successful broadcaster of conspiracy theories overseas. So we actually do quite well in New Zealand when it comes to conspiracy theories and the dissemination thereof. Now, some of you have been listening to this little historical litany about conspiracy theories, and going, Matthew, actually we need a definition. We need to know what we're talking about here before we can start appraising whether conspiracy theories are good or bad. So let me start off, or let me continue, given I've already been speaking for a good 10 minutes, with a definition. A conspiracy theory is an explanation of an event which cites a conspiracy as a salient cause. So I'm going to claim that all a conspiracy theory is, when you look at it in some depth, is simply it's a theory about a conspiracy, where you're saying the conspiracy is causative of some event within the world. And note that this definition says nothing about whether conspiracy theories are typically good or typically bad. It simply says, look, it's a theory and we have to evaluate it on its merits, which is to say, can we show there existed a conspiracy, and then can we show the conspiracy is connected in the right way to an explanation of an event. And the reason why I think we should use a low-level, broad definition of this particular type is that we need to distinguish between belief in conspiracy theories and this thing called conspiracism. So, conspiracism is the thesis that there are people out there who believe conspiracy theories for no particularly good reason. So there are people out there who act irrationally or fail to engage their critical faculties or have some inbred assumptions or presumptions about the likelihood of conspiracies operating in the world in which we live. And these people, the conspiracists, are liable to believe in any conspiracy theory you put in front of them. But conspiracism, the thesis that there are some people who believe in conspiracy theories for any old reason, needs to be distinguished from the notion that sometimes belief in conspiracy theories might be warranted given the evidence. Take this for an example. Whether or not you are an atheist, you'll be aware that there are some atheists out there, say for example Richard Dawkins, who have fairly bad rationales or arguments in support of their atheism. And he's a prominent individual within the skeptical community, but it would be wrong to describe atheism solely with respect to the views of Richard Dawkins. That would be an irrational move. Just because there's one person out there with bad arguments for their atheism doesn't tell us that all atheists are similarly irrational. In the same respect, just because we can find examples of conspiracy theorists in the wild who will believe any conspiracy theory they hear for no particularly good reason isn't a particularly good rationale for dismissing all belief in conspiracy theories. If you're doing that, you are committing a fallacy. You're generalizing to a point and ignoring the fact that in some particular situations, conspiracy theories might be warranted by the evidence. So we should never conflate issues to do with conspiracism with whether individual conspiracy theories turn out to be warranted. Because whilst conspiracism may be irrational, not every conspiracy theorist is going to be a conspiracist, i.e. it's not clear that everyone who believes in a theory about a conspiracy is irrational, even if it turns out that all conspiracists believe in conspiracy theories. And this is the root of the kind of course we do when we do 105. We are critical thinkers, or we're aspiring to be critical thinkers, or we're brushing up on our critical thinking lexicon. And we want to say, look, if you put forward an argument for a position, I am obliged to analyse that argument on its merit, whether it's a conspiracy theory or not. So if you simply say, look, I believe that the moon is made out of cheese, there's a vast right-wing conspiracy by the American Republican Party to prevent people from knowing that, and I go, all right, fine, what's your reason for that? And you go, I just believe it. Then I can say that sounds like a vapid conspiracy theory and I should ignore it. But if you provide me with an argument in support of that particular claim, I am obliged as a critical thinker to evaluate the argument on its merits, no matter the kind of argument it is, conspiracy theory or otherwise. So, with that groundwork laid, let's just get to the nitty-gritty of what you need to do to analyze any conspiracy theory. So, conspiracy theories rest upon claims that there exists a conspiracy. So, when we say there exists a conspiracy, we are basically obliged to believe the following three things. There exists a set of agents, we might call them plotters or conspirators, who intend some end to come about, and they act in secret. So to believe in the existence of a conspiracy, you've got to believe there exist conspirators, because people have to act together. To conspire is to act with other people. People can't conspire on their own. They need to intend some end to come about, although it's not necessary that they actually do anything about it. You can be involved in a conspiracy and never actually achieve anything of note. Take, for example, organising a surprise party for a friend, which when you think about it, is a pretty conspiratorial thing to do. You're going to organise a surprise party for a friend, you get together with other friends, you act in secret to try and make sure your friend doesn't know you're organising a surprise party, because if they find out you're organising a surprise party, it's not going to be much of a surprise, and you intend some end. You want to organise the party. And the party is going to be in about 2 weeks' time, and so what you do is you get together with some friends on a Friday night and go, look, we've got to really organise Jeff's party. It's going to be fantastic. So let's sit down and organise it, what we're going to do, who we're going to invite, where we're going to hold it, and then one of your friends say, oh yeah, let's do that in a minute, but I've got this really great board game I've just bought. Let's play that for a few hours, and then we'll get down to the nitty-gritty of organising the party. And you play the board game, and then everyone's tired. Look, we'll organise it tomorrow on Facebook, and it'll be fine. And then tomorrow, no one gets around to it, and 2 weeks later, you go, oh, well, we were organising a surprise party, but it never came about. You acted conspiratorially towards an end, organised a surprise party, acted in secret with friends, but you didn't achieve anything of note. So you can conspire without actually achieving anything. And we'll get back to that at the end of today's lecture, because that ends up being incredibly important. Now, not every conspiracy theory turns out to be plausible. I, for one, don't think that David Icke's claim that alien shape-shifting reptiles are drinking our blood, eating our babies, and sucking our emotions out of our skulls is a particularly plausible claim to make about George W. Bush, Margaret Thatcher, and the Queen Mother. But some of them, if we evaluate them, are going to be fine. So this gets us on to something which Pat will be looking at in more depth on Thursday, evaluating inferences to the best explanation. And what I want to say is that one of our reasons for being suspicious of some conspiracy theories in the wild is this. Often they fail to be good explanations for an event, i.e., when you are analysing the conspiracy theory that's being put forward, you go, look, there's a simpler, more plausible explanation that doesn't rely on a claim of conspiracy here. And surely in that situation, we are obliged to go with the simplest, most plausible explanation rather than the unlikely conspiratorial one. And that may turn out to be a good reason to be suspicious of some conspiracy theories. They're examples of what we call the just so fallacy, named after Rudyard Kipling's Just So stories, which would be really great explanations as to say how the leopard got its spots if there weren't more prosaic biological explanations available that don't rely on magical finger painting. So when we talk about an inference to the best explanation, what we're saying is that, look, here are some rival explanations for an event within the world. Let's say that one features a conspiracy, the other one does not. The best explanation is going to be one which basically accounts for all the data in a way where it's most likely to be true. And inferences to explanations go wrong when either we fail to consider a worthwhile rival explanation amongst the available explanations we have, or we make a bad judgment about which explanation is most likely to be true. So some people worry that people jump towards conspiracy theories rather than non-conspiracy theories to explain events within the world, just for the sheer fact that they've failed to consider more prosaic non-conspiratorial alternatives. Or people worry about talk about conspiracy theories in contemporary politics, because people are more likely to jump to a conclusion about a conspiracy rather than actually realize it's relatively unlikely compared to its rivals. So these are two issues we need to consider when we hear any conspiracy theory in the wild. And this is because the just so fallacy says that, look, occasionally people just fail to give enough attention or due consideration to other alternative hypotheses. But not every conspiracy theory is going to rely upon appeal to the just so fallacy, however. Take, for example, 9/11. So 9/11 is a fairly big historical event in contemporary culture, and no matter what you believe about 9/11, you believe a conspiracy theory. So if you're the kind of person who believes that the destruction of the Twin Towers was the result of a conspiracy organized by the organization called Al-Qaeda, because when you think about it, the terrorist activity that Al-Qaeda is alleged to have engaged in is very much conspiratorial. The terrorists trained in secret towards some end of flying 747s into the Twin Towers and attacking Washington, D.C. in an attempt upon the White House. So they acted in secret towards some end, and they worked together. That seems like a classic example of a conspiracy, and this kind of terrorist activity is very conspiratorial in nature. So if you believe the official story about 9/11, you believe in a conspiracy theory which just happens to be warranted, it is claimed, by the available evidence. In the same respect, if you disbelieve the official theory, then you are someone who claims that, look, 9/11 wasn't caused by Al-Qaeda. It was probably caused by elements within the American government who conspired against the citizens of America and the world and ran a false flag campaign, which is a campaign where you make it look like someone else is guilty for the act you have committed, to try and, I don't know, bring in authoritarian draconian rule within America and, say, legitimize invasions overseas for the harvesting of oil wealth in the Middle East. And that's a conspiracy theory. So whether you believe the official theory about 9/11, that rests upon a claim of conspiracy, just happens to be what most people consider to be a warranted conspiracy theory, or you believe the rival hypothesis, the claim that Al-Qaeda did it, well, that turns out to be a conspiracy theory as well. It just turns out that many people are skeptical of that. But whatever you believe about 9/11, it's one conspiracy versus another. So when we're evaluating which is more likely, we have to evaluate the conspiracy theories on their own merits, rather than going at you've got a prima facie justification for believing one conspiracy theory, for believing the official theory over a conspiracy theory. Because the official theory in this case is a conspiracy theory as well. You have to weigh up the merits of the conspiracy theories, rather than actually go, look, the official theory is more likely to be true because it doesn't involve a claim of conspiracy. Now, many people, and presumably some of you, will at this stage be going, well, hold on. Surely the whole point about talk of official theories is that official theories are theories which are just more likely to be true because they've gone through the right kind of accreditation process, or they rest upon the right kind of an appeal to authority. So surely when we talk about an official theory, we're not simply saying it's a conspiracy theory, say, like the 9/11 claim that was committed by Al-Qaeda. We're saying, look, it's warranted because it's got the right appeal to expertise operating in the background. There's something remarkably different, this person who argues this way will claim, between an official theory and a conspiracy theory, even if the official theory has elements of conspiracy within it. Because official theories are just better. They're accredited in just the right way. So this is the claim that official theories are explanations of events which have been endorsed by an influential institution, and that is a reason for preferring it. Now, can anyone think of an objection to this particular claim, that we should take official theories on their own merits? Yes?
Those influential institutions may have their own reasons.
Yeah. So it's quite possible that official institutions, so influential institutions or public institutions, may have their own agendas. I mean, imagine the influential institution is involved in a conspiracy, and you go to it saying, "Are you conspiring?" They're not likely to say yes. Not like, "Oh, you've caught me this time. I was going to get away with it too if it hadn't been for you damn kids." No, in most of these situations, if an official institution was conspiring, they're liable to put out claims that their theory is correct and the rival conspiratorial view about exactly what they're up to is wrong. So we have to actually ask questions about the relevance of the institution to the claim we're trying to assess. So you'll recall, you've all done appeals to authority in an earlier lecture, I'm assuming. You had last time I did this guest lecture. An appeal to authority is legitimate or non-fallacious if all of the following conditions are met. The expert is in a field relevant to the truth of the conclusion being argued for. There's substantial agreement amongst experts in that field that the view has been endorsed correctly, and the expert is testifying honestly. Now, of course, many conspiracy theorists are worried by that third claim. Are experts testifying honestly when they're actually debunking or refuting conspiracy theories about them? And of course, this is a live issue, because occasionally examples that show that official institutions have actually lied to the publics they serve actually turn out to be true. Why have I lost? There we go. Let's skip ahead slightly. Take, for example, 1930s Russia. 1930s Russia was a tumultuous time for citizens of the free world. It was also a tumultuous time for citizens of Russia who were not living in a particularly free state at that particular point in time. In the 1930s, Joseph Stalin was leader of the USSR, and he had fought for quite some time to take the preeminent place in the People's Committee of the Soviet Republic. And as part of this battle to get to his preeminent position, he had a major falling out with an old friend of his, Leon Trotsky. So Stalin and Trotsky had both been revolutionaries at the beginning of the communist revolution, but they had very different ideas about what communism should be in modern Russia. Trotsky was of the opinion that to get the communist revolution really going, you had to foment revolt everywhere, so the entire world needed to turn communist, so that the communist revolution would be completed. Stalin, on the other hand, felt that you were better off cementing the revolution in Russia first, and then converting other countries to communism as you went. And the fallout between Trotsky and Stalin was so great that Stalin disowned Trotsky, and Trotsky spent the rest of his life in exile in Europe and in Central America. Now, Stalin was also paranoid. Stalin's also one of the greatest mass murderers in human history. As an individual, he signed the death warrants for more people than anyone else we know of. So his paranoia was really quite fantastically great, for a weird sense of fantastic there. And he was convinced that Trotsky was engaged in a conspiracy to return back to Russia, foment a revolution, and overthrow him. So he bade the security police and the secret service of the time to go and find evidence of Trotsky's conspiracy to return to Russia. Security police reported back saying there was no evidence that Trotsky had any interest in Russia anymore. Trotsky was firmly committed to communist revolutions overseas and felt that Russia was a failed experiment, and when the rest of the world turned communist, then Russia would have to come in lockstep. But for the time being, Trotsky had no desire to return back to his homeland at all. And Stalin's response to this was telling. He said, "Look, I told you to go and find evidence of Trotsky conspiring to return to Russia, and you haven't done that, try again." So over 9 months, security police and the secret service kidnapped, abducted, and psychologically tortured former sympathizers of Leon Trotsky for a period of time, and then forced them to testify in a court of law that there was a massive conspiracy by Trotsky to return back to Russia, thus legitimizing their executions, and furthermore, legitimizing the execution and assassination warrant on Trotsky's head, to the point where Trotsky was killed outside of Frida Kahlo's house in Cuba with an ice pick to the cranium. Now, at the time, people were a bit suspicious of these trials, And people actually trawled through the trial data, because the trials were public, and found a remarkable number of inconsistencies. Trotsky, it turned out, was in two places at the same time for several meetings. So some days he was both in London and Vienna having coffee with sympathisers in an era where you couldn't be in London and Vienna on the same day due to a lack of high-speed air travel. Trotsky's son, who died in about 1932, was having meetings with people in 1934 and 1935, which is a very unusual thing for a dead person to do. And so John Dewey, an American philosopher, formed a commission of inquiry into the Moscow trials, and they released a report saying that they thought the trial verdicts were a sham and that there was a conspiracy to cover up what really happened there. They presented this report to the government of the UK and the government of the US, and the governments of the UK and the US said, this is a fairly startling claim, let's check up on it. So they called the Kremlin and said, we've heard you may have conspired to pervert the verdicts in these trials, is that true? And Stalin and his cronies said, no, that is disinformatia, or what we now know as disinformation, which is the very day the term was invented. These people are vapid conspiracy theorists. There's no truth to these allegations whatsoever. So this happened in 1936. So for 20 years, the Dewey Commission and the members of the Dewey Commission were labelled as vapid conspiracy theorists about the Moscow trials, until 1956, when Joseph Stalin died, and his successor to the chair of the Communist Party, Nikita Khrushchev, admitted to the Russian Assembly that actually the conspiracy theory was true after all. Stalin had conspired to pervert the verdicts in the trials, and Khrushchev was now washing his hands of the entire affair. It should be pointed out, Khrushchev was one of the conspirators responsible for the perversion of the verdict, but he was trying to create a clean break between Stalin's regime and his own. It turns out the Dewey Commission were right, and it was wrong to label them as conspiracy theorists. And it was wrong for the governments of the UK and the US at that time to take the assurances of the Russian government as being good, because they were being insincere in their official capacity. It turns out they were lying, and actually the conspiracy theories about them were true, and they were trying to cover it up with disinformation of their own. So they called the Dewey Commission report disinformation, but actually it was their response to the Dewey Commission report and the trials themselves that were the real disinformation in this particular case. So we need to be aware that sometimes people in positions of authority do actually speak untruly. And there are lots of other examples throughout the contemporary literature. The Gulf of Tonkin incident in the US is another great example of a government, in this case the US government, simply not telling the truth about a military action in Vietnam, and thus forcing an issue, in this case actually going to war, on a pretense or a falsity. Now, of course, there's something we need to think about here. There are lots of claims of conspiracy in the world, and not every single claim of conspiracy turns out to be true. And if we go back to the earlier discussion of the surprise parties at the beginning of the lecture, there's also the secondary issue. Even if we can show that a conspiracy has occurred, nothing about that particular claim about a conspiracy tells us the conspiracy is responsible for any event within the world. So you can organise a surprise party to your heart's content, or at least attempt to organise a surprise party, but if you never actually get round to actually having the surprise party, then that turns out to be A, a waste of your time, and B, a pretty poor example of you conspiring on someone's behalf. For a conspiracy theory to be considered good, we've got to show, look, there existed a conspiracy, and we've got to show that the conspiracy we're talking about is causally responsible for some event within the world. So for a conspiracy theory to be considered the best explanation of some event, we need to show there's a connection between the act of conspiracy and some event we're trying to explain. So when we think about the Moscow show trials, There was a claim there was a conspiracy to the verdict, and the Dewey Commission then advanced an argument to show, look, there must have been a conspiracy to get this particular verdict because the trial testimony is so inconsistent. There's no way a jury or a judge could have decided in favour of the state unless they'd been paid off or they were involved in a conspiracy to render a prearranged verdict. So when someone puts forward a conspiracy theory, you need to ask, do you have an argument in support of that particular claim? So you need to show there existed some group of plotters. You need to show that they had at least some intention to bring about some end. And you need to show that they operated in time in secret. So you need to show that actually they were doing something, even if it turns out they didn't actually achieve much of note. But to show the conspiracy is responsible for some event, you've got to show that all three of these are true, and they are the best explanation for some other event within the world. So whilst we know that the kind of event that 9/11 was must have been based around an act of conspiracy, because no matter what you think about 9/11, it was a surprise attack, whether it was committed by elements of Al-Qaeda or elements of the American government, so people operated in secret to bring it about. It's obviously a conspiracy. The question is, which kind of conspiracy is the best explanation here? Which conspiracy can we show existed, and also be the conspiracy which explains why the event occurred? And the reason why we have to make the distinction is crucial. Many of the conspiracy theories about 9/11, known as the inside job hypothesis, the claim that actually it was the American establishment which was responsible for causing 9/11, will point to a certain amount of evidence for this claim. Say, look, if you read documents about the rise of a new American century, or documents about American imperialism, it's quite clear that members of the Republican Party, like Dick Cheney, really did want some event to occur which would allow America to go to war overseas and increase their military holdings in the Middle East, such that they'd be able to secure the oil reserves they need to continue operating the country. Now, it's fairly clear this was something that Dick Cheney did want. But it's a big difference here that, look, Dick Cheney would like there to be a massive attack on American soil to legitimize American movements overseas, from the claim that Dick Cheney caused that event to occur. So you can say, look, Dick Cheney wanted an event like 9/11 to occur because it gave him all these other things that he desired to occur, such as decreased civil liberties, increased oil reserves. But that doesn't tell you he caused it. He may have wanted to conspire, but there's nothing that tells you he ever engaged in a conspiracy with his peers to bring that event about. And we can contrast that with the official theory of 9/11, the conspiracy theory that says that it was the group Al-Qaeda that agitated and caused the event, by looking at the evidence which supports that particular claim, such as the admission by Osama bin Laden they were behind it, the forensic evidence, and all the other bits and pieces, and go, look, even if Dick Cheney had wanted it, it turns out we can show there was a conspiracy by Al-Qaeda, and it's the best explanation of the event in question. Because even though we can show in some cases that conspiracies occur, that doesn't necessarily tell us that they are the best explanation for an event. And I'm going to just close us out here with a short instructional video, which hopefully will make this crystal clear. Let me get our lighting.
So, we're all agreed that that's the best way to do it.
Absolutely. It's so simple. No messing around with poison-tipped umbrellas or snipers. We just get a chauffeur drunk.
Slightly drunk.
And assume that he'll crash the car.
As long as we pay for a bunch of motorcycling photographers to harass him, I'm sure that'll happen.
And the good news is that only involves swearing another 15 or so people to perpetual silence.
Yes. Plus, people always die in car crashes, don't they?
Yes, always. And people who drive over the limit always crash. What we're organising here, my friends, is a watertight hit. My only worry is that it'll look so much like a murder that people will suspect.
Well, that is the risk we run by doing it this way. It will be totally obvious that it's an assassination, but remember what the Duke of Edinburgh said when he came in here to MI6 to give us our orders. I don't mind carrying the lifelong suspicion of murder on my shoulders, as long as you kill her in such a way that absolutely nothing can go wrong.
Induced tipsy car crash it'll have to be then. It simply can't fail. Unless she wears a seatbelt.
She won't. She's unprovably pregnant, remember? Women recently impregnated by the only man they've ever loved are notoriously slapdash about their personal safety.
So, Dart, you're our best troubleshooter. Is there anything that we've missed?
I've got one little niggle. Why are we doing this?
Well, because Prince Philip told us to. It's well known that the nation's security services are still pretty much at the beck and call of the royal family. This is top priority. The IRA can do whatever they like this weekend, let me tell you.
Why is he doing it?
Well, because she's so popular. She's beautiful and everyone loves her. We need to kill her now so that people will go off her.
I mean, just think about it. If she's left alive to age as gracefully as one can while bringing up the bastard grandchild of a delusional Egyptian businessman, the public's just going to love her more and more.
You're quite right. As her appearance wrinkles and sags, and she occasionally makes a vacuous remark about something complicated, people's hatred for the rest of the royal family will only intensify.
Whereas if she's dead, she'll be forgotten in a week.
Yes, of course. You've made me feel very naive.
Hello? Oh. Life imitating art, I suppose. Right. Well, thank you. Well, you can stand down, everyone. That all just happened by accident.
Well, don't tell Prince Philip. We'll still get our fee.
So that is a... Oh, now we've actually... Oh. So that is a very nice example of the kind of thing which we need to be aware of when we're talking about conspiracy theories. Is that going to... Oh, yes, here come the lights again. In that is a nice example of a complex event where there's a conspiracy theory and a non-conspiracy theory being offered in support of that particular claim. Some of you actually may not be old enough to quite remember the horror the world felt when Princess Diana died, where we've got two options. Either it was a very, very elaborate hit, orchestrated in such a way that the French paparazzi were unaware the car that they were chasing was rigged to engage in a fatal accident, or it turned out the car was being driven by a drunken chauffeur and the passengers in the back had failed to put their seatbelts on, and thus because of a high-speed collision due to the drunken chauffeur and the lack of safety taken by the passengers, everyone in that particular vessel died. So you've got a conspiracy theory here, which turns out to be relatively unlikely, versus a official theory which rests upon a mere accident. And so when we're concerned about conspiracy theories, we've got to say, look, what rival theories are there to the claim of conspiracy, and how do we evaluate them? I.e., does it turn out that when we evaluate each one individually, does it turn out the conspiracy theory is automatically false? Or does it turn out that in some cases, theories about conspiracies turn out to be warranted by the evidence that's put in support of them? Because in the end, if we're doing critical thinking, the whole point of the endeavour is to analyse arguments for positions. So if you hear a conspiracy theory, you've got no good reason automatically to assume it's going to be bad, unless you're going to go through the process of analysing the conspiracy theory, looking at the rival hypotheses which also explain the same event, and then going on the probabilities in this particular case, the conspiracy theory is either going to be good or bad. Because that is your obligation as citizens of the 105 community. And with those bold claims, and senatorian words, I will now bid you adieu. I hope you have a good rest of your afternoon, and good luck with all the assessments and other related assignmenty stuff that I'm sure Pat and Tim are giving you with absolute aplomb. Thank you.